Hello, internets, and welcome to Nap. This is not a podcast where we take a break out of our busy Wednesday schedules to talk about important topics such as pro mistakes, whatever that means.
Yeah, what does that
uh,
mean, Martin? You're the one that picked the
I
topic.
did not pick that name. That was
Well,
our
I think
graphics buddy over there.
yeah, his name was so long. I'm like, I can't put this whole like in the title. I gotta shorten it up.
Is
So
that like extra
yeah, not the little
well-established
mistakes.
mistakes? Like
Yeah, yeah.
mistakes that are like professionally made? They're
We
just
did
impossible to fix.
we try to do a good job everywhere. So these are like we did a really good job making a mistake.
It looks very professional.
Yeah,
I can
My name
think
is
that's a-
Morton. I am joined as always by my co-hosts, Sharon Bennett, Walt Richer, and Ray Villalobos. Together we are the Nappers, I guess.
Napsters, I think. Yeah.
The
I
subject
can't use
for
that term.
the subject for today's conversation is what is your biggest professional mistake and what did you learn from it? As we all know, if you've ever had a job, you've made a mistake and hopefully you've learned from it in some fashion. Sometimes those mistakes are very big and or they can be very embarrassing or they can be very consequential, but the reality is we learn things from all our mistakes. There's if you go on the internet and you search for like uh, motivational quotes about mistakes, you'll find a million famous people saying things like, the only thing you learn from in life are mistakes, blah, 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 etc., etc. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to ask Ray first because Ray and I talk about things like this all the time. Ray, what is the biggest professional mistake you've made and what did you learn from it?
Yeah. So I think mine is more of a theme. I think that for me, one of the things that I didn't understand about work in general was that there's a social aspect to working. And for me, that was really hard because when I was growing up, my dad always told me, just work hard, because that's how he moved up in the world. He just was super hard worker. He went from being like a bank teller to being vice president of many countries' banks, and he even got into Panamanian government at one point, and he was running the budgets for everything. And he did that purely by hard work. So I feel like he felt that that's really the only thing that you needed to succeed. But when I got into the US and I started working professionally, I found out that there's this very interesting social component to work. And I had no idea. I was just doing what my dad told me, just worked hard and tried to do exceptional work. And I just really wasn't getting ahead. And so also that for me, networking is very difficult. I think I'm more socially adept now, and it's really hard for people to consider me as not being socially adept, but it's completely something that I've trained myself on. And I think that that's what I would have done differently if I had that knowledge, when I was growing up, before I got started. I would have learned a lot more about, the social aspect of work, making sure that I don't know, I think that, and I think I see a lot of this in developers, that they tend to be very much about how good you are. And there's a component that, is a little bit more about how you interact with others. And I knew none of that, and I was really horrible about it. And I kind of learned about it the hard way. But it's something that I've really worked hard. And you can get so much farther by, learning how to be polite, how to work in a group, how to talk to others, making yourself as a non-social person. Attend things like, I would be happy when I go somewhere. I will be perfectly happy staying like in a hotel the entire time. But I learned that there is value to being social. So I make myself go to the party, go to the event. You guys know I'm not a drinker, but I go to those things and I walk around with a glass of wine or something. And I just have learned to interact with people. And it's actually been super beneficial. Like I found that it's actually expanded me as a person, a better sense of team world. So I see you laughing at my being social. So what do you think, Morton?
We were laughing at that. You were frozen. That's
yeah,
why we were laughing.
you were like, and you
Frozen like this.
expanded.
Oh,
So
so
But it's funny that you say that you used to be not a social person, because I've been to conferences with Ray, and he's
So
like the
have I.
guy that goes out and talks to everyone and has like, oh, look at all the people that I now have connections with. And I'm like, what? I met
Yeah.
like the butler. Had a long chat with a guy outside.
Yeah, it's totally, for me, it has been like a journey, and it's totally just a lot of training, because I think my father-in-law always tells me that I'm an extrovert, and I try to tell him I'm not.
It's
This
just
is
very good
all
at making it.
No, it's just like all the trained kind of sort of response at understanding like the value of meeting people and making connections. It's super, super valuable. And
This is like me leaving
He said
messages
with
on,
his hands up.
on phone machines. I always do that when I leave people messages. I'm like, oh, and one more thing, and then I hang up.
Oh, that's really nice of
And
you.
I'm like, this is what Ray just did to us.
if
Thank you
can
very
train
much,
yourself,
Ray.
just like when I look, yeah, I
We
mean,
lost
like,
you, Ray.
am I back or something?
We
You
lost
just
your
gave
most
about
important
30
point.
seconds of you there.
And we lost him again. Well, while Ray fixes his internet connection, I'm going to pass this over to Sharon, who has an animal that's doing something right now.
I do. So those of you who follow me online, you know that I've got 2 dogs, and Lucy's the beagle, and she has her hashtag Beagle Baby, and she really is a 40-pound baby, and she's at my feet right now snoring. So that noise that you hear will be the beagle. I apologize. But going back to mistakes, I've made tons of them. Been in the field for a long, long time, but there was a couple that really stand out. One is, it was an email blunder. Okay, this is back in the day,
Well,
let's face it. And remember back in the day, we would exchange things like maybe music or applications, maybe back in the day. Yeah. we don't do that anymore, of course,
Yes.
but back in the day. So I was working for a very large organization, several thousand people, and I don't remember what the email system was, but I started, populating the 2 to one of my coworkers, because we might have been talking about what we had. It ended up going to a VP.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden the VP, is going, I don't think this email was for me, and you may not want to be, sharing software. And it was like, oh no. So what have I learned? I always check the 2. I never, ever rely on that automatic population of the 2 field.
That's good
yeah.
advice.
Yeah, that was hard. I mean, he was really good about it, but that was my mistake. And don't ever do it from a work email either. And then
Don't commit software piracy on work time with work software.
Exactly. But I was young, I was foolish, I didn't know any better. So that's again, that's going back a long, long time, like years and years and years ago. The other one, it was actually at the same company. And this is where I learned the good old CYA. Everybody familiar with CYA? Cover your behind.
Mm-hmm.
So we were struggling with a software issue. We were having a bug in some software. It was conflicting with something else, and it was affecting many users. We've all been there. You're banging your head against the wall. I figured out what the issue was. And so I emailed that to my supervisor. My supervisor then took my email word for word, sent it off to management and leadership, and said she had solved the problem. I was livid. So CYA, always document what you're doing, because you never know who may steal it from you. That is the only time that's ever happened, but it made such an impression on, if I want to get ahead, I've got to advocate for myself, and I can't let other people do that. So that was my learning, and my 2 big blunders, with the exception of, I've locked myself out of systems and, the standard stuff. We've all done that. And when all else fails, you blame DNS. But, and that's the thing, right? When you make a mistake, own up to it. Admit it. Yes, I made a mistake. Fix it if you can. and then learn from it, and then let others know that, this is something that they could fall into. Walt, how about you?
That's interesting. You went back a few decades and are talking about early stuff, and I think what I wanted to focus on today is, and I haven't made any like super catastrophic disasters in my career, but I've picked a lot of wrong technologies over the years and made my bets on those. Like early days I did some projects in the early days with Token Ring, and eventually Ethernet won that battle. And then I was a huge believer in Windows Phone. I thought it was going to be a gigantic success, and I spent a lot of time and money working on getting to be an expert in that field. And I really, not just because I thought it was the right thing to do, because I was really excited about the technology. I think that's one of the points I want to make. You get excited about a technology, and it may not be the best bet because the other technology is going to make you more money or be a better career. And so Windows Phone was great, but it died, sadly. And then another one similar was Silverlight, the Microsoft Silverlight for building UI, and again, I thought that was really spectacular. And of course that died because of many reasons, including Apple killing off all third-party plugins for browsers. That was probably the main one there. But so for me, the lesson is, I don't know if I have a lesson, because I've always managed to come back and find well, I made a mistake in this one. I'll make a bet on this one, and this time it's the right choice. So what do you think? Is it better to, do you have two technologies you keep in your mind? There's too much work to do that. What do you think, Morten?
Wow, the Silverlight one is tough, because I remember when Microsoft was pushing that, and especially I both Windows Phone and Silverlight are good examples of where everything, they should have been huge successes. And to be fair, Silverlight actually was a huge success for a long time.
It was.
Like Netflix was running Silverlight until like 2 years ago or something like that. So it was still sitting there. It was just buried under other text. You couldn't see it. But I think you're hitting on something really important in our space, which is you often have these competing technologies, and it's very hard to know which one will win. And the factors that make something win or lose are often have nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with popularity or everything else. Like the classic example, which is Betamax versus VHS, right? Where the thing that caused VHS to take off had nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with a certain type of content that was very easily distributable and it was popular. And it just popularized the platform. Whereas the other alternative, the Betamax, was infinitely better than VHS, right? And we've also seen like short-lived technologies like mini disc.
Yes, I had that too.
Through the 90s, there was a period of time where it was like you had CDs, but CDs weren't recordable. And then you had mini disc, which was much better than CDs, and you could record on it. And it was this very advanced technology that didn't have the issues CDs have. And it was huge, but then it just kind of slowly faded away until now no one knows what you're talking about, right? And do you remember there was a period of time where there was a diskette for your computer that had a CD type thing inside it? It's called an optical disc. So this is another, like IBM, I think, introduced it, and it was an actual disc that looked like the smaller diskettes, right? But it had a CD inside, a burnable CD inside.
I do remember that now.
That you could put in, that had an enormous amount of memory compared to the other ones. And it was one of those much better than tape technology and much better than the zip drive, but the zip drive killed it.
Which is, I was going to go, I had the zip drive.
Garbage technology. That was like, oh, you hold it the wrong way for too long and you lose your data. That was basically how reliable that was.
Don't squeeze it. You'll lose your data.
I worked in TV and we had to transfer enormous image files. So we had to use zip disks. So I have 2 zip drives at home, and I have like probably boxes full of zip disks. And the reason I have them is every time I needed to transfer something, I'd have to put it on 3 or 4 disks to just make sure that I had at least one that worked, because they would die so quickly. And there
So
was competing technology that was much better, but because of random reasons, it never took off.
did you
So
ever
I
move
think
up
the
to
lesson here is
sorry.
don't immediately buy into the technology Walt picks.
I picked some good ones. Wait, I had picked some good ones. We have some comments. It looks like some people are explaining some of their blunders. One was
I
with a
made
mail
a
merge.
big blunder.
There,
with
Ray
a
put it up
mail
on the
merge.
screen.
Right. A mail merge which resulted in the wrong letters going out to dozens of clients and made it worse
Ooh.
by trying to fix it alone.
Ooh.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing that.
It's funny to see how many people search for things like, how do you unsend email? Because it's very easy to accidentally send email to the wrong people or not realize that someone is on the email. I was on an email chain once where somehow like there was an email about like how to convince someone to buy something. And then at some point, the person that was going to be sold to was included in the email chain. And then the person is like, thanks for giving me your entire strategy. And this stuff is very offensive. Like, never mind. We failed on that sale.
So, Wharton, you haven't told us what one of your blunders was.
I was thinking about this for a long time because I've made I could write books about my mistakes. And some of them have been very bad. Some of them have been very trivial. But I was talking to my wife about it to try to figure out like what is something that a mistake I made a long time ago that still impacts me today, right? That's relevant. And I think this is a mistake that a lot of people who work, especially on the web, make. Actually, any kind of gig economy work, you could end up in this place, which is doing work for almost like pro bono work for someone to help them, or doing work for a friend or both to help them out. So the classic example, which is where I'm at, is 10 years ago, I built a website for a friend who has a company because they needed a new website and their old website was garbage. And it was a one-time thing. It's like, I'll just build a new website. It's fine, whatever. And then I'll host it on my server because you don't have a server and it's fine. And then there's some update stuff that needs to happen with some calendars and, so I just go in there and update the calendar. And then there's some marketing stuff that needs to be done. And there's some, Google Analytics integration and some Google AdSense integration and some Facebook ads and some other stuff that needs to be integrated. And there's a little bit more stuff and just, and then at a certain point, it's 10 years later and you go, actually, this website needs an upgrade because it's no longer standard. It needs to be completely upgraded. And the only person who can do it is me because I've established over a 10-year period that web design is free and all these services cost nothing. So when I go to my friend and I say, hey, you have to get the site redesigned and it's going to cost you this much money to hire someone to do it. They're like, well, why would I? Like, that's crazy. That's way more money than I have to pay for this. And it's like, well, you've been getting all this stuff for free for a long time. And then the result is nothing changes. And then the emails keep coming like, hey, we need to update this thing and need to update the calendar. And it's one of those, it's difficult because like the mistakes are twofold. One is you never give away your work for free. And everyone does this when they start out, or everyone does this if they're in a situation where they're like, my friend is doing something, or this company or this nonprofit just needs a little bit of help. If you do that, you just lock yourself into a perpetual plan of I now need to maintain it. And the other part is never work for your friends. Just never work for your friends ever. Because if you do, you're trapped in a situation where if you back out, it will be seen as a slight, no matter how much it is, right? And people told me this when I started out. People have been telling me this for a long time. And I just can't help it. I keep doing it. But I've gotten better at it. So now I tell people like, I'll do this thing as a one-time thing just to fix, like your site got hacked, I'll fix it for you. That's it. Like I'll fix it once. I'll tell you what went wrong. I'll fix it. But if you have this problem again, you need to go somewhere else because I'm not going to keep fixing this for you. And I make it very clear
Does that work?
this is a one-time thing. And I say like, I'll refer you to someone else next time. And then I refer them and that works. But it requires a lot of, what do you call it? Sorry, I was talking to someone in Norwegian earlier, so my English is kind of off taking a bike ride in a forest somewhere. Like, what is it called? I need to have
Contract?
integrity. No, I need. It requires me to be very loyal to myself, right? Because there's a lot of social pressure in. It's just the one thing. Oh, can't you just? I was just gonna move the thing, right? And then you'd be like, "No, I said no. I said one time. You spent your one coin. That's it."
Well, yeah, all of us in tech joke about this as being the tech support for your family, and
Yeah.
and it's like, and this is exactly what you're talking about. Is like, and it's hard because we have expertise, and my sister doesn't. Right? You go over there, or my brother-in-law is like, "Can you fix this for me?" It's like, well, sure, but then, like, I had a friendship of mine that disintegrated 20 years ago because of that. Is that the friend would call me all the time, and all he wanted was me to help him fix stuff. And it's like, you never call me for anything but that.
Yeah,
And Morten, you made a really good point. You know, if you are a consultant and starting out, make sure you value your work right off at the get-go. It's really easy to go, oh, you know, I'm new to this. I have to be competitive, or maybe you have a really bad case of imposter syndrome. Value your work and price it accordingly, because otherwise it will haunt you for years.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I have a talk I do when I talk to students about understanding what your time is worth. And it's because a lot of people who are designers, UX, web design, anything like that, they all end up doing, or they all think that working independently is a goal. Like you should have your own business and be a freelancer. So I go through the whole, like, what does it cost to be a freelancer in terms of like, what is your overhead cost just in software and hardware and all these pieces, and then your business insurance, and then all the things that people don't think about. Like when you go out and get a job and you get paid, what, $25 to $50 an hour, you're not paying overhead. You're just getting money. But if you go and work freelance and you charge $25 to $50 an hour, you're basically paying your client because you're not actually paying for your own costs. And I have a formula to calculate your worth. And what I tell them is, if you're doing work for a friend, you should actually invoice them. But say like friend discount one time only 100%, right? So they can see how much the thing you did cost. So that when they go out into the world and try to find someone else to do the job, they're not shocked at the cost of what you did, right? And that is, I've done it a couple of times, and people are always, they get very awkward around it because they realize, like, you can tell them up front, like, this is going to take X number of hours and it will cost whatever. You can tell them using your voice, and it kind of just goes straight through their head, in one ear, out the other. Sending them an invoice where they see the numbers, they always get super awkward because they're like, oh my God, I just like stole money from you, right? And so when you do it, you have to kind of handle that situation in a way that doesn't make them feel uncomfortable about it. To say, this isn't charity, this isn't me pitying you in any way. This is literally me investing in your business by doing this, right? I believe in what you're doing, or I believe in whatever, to show them that you're not just giving them something out of, but you're doing something to help them frame their mind correctly, so that they don't always feel indebted to you for doing this. Because in many cases, the reason why we pick up these projects is because it's easy for us to do, right? And it's a trivial thing. We see a problem, we know how to solve it. It's easy to solve. And it's much easier for us to solve it than to help the person find someone else and then listen to the endless conversations afterwards about how the person they hired doesn't do the job properly and blah, blah, blah. Right?
Morten, I have a question for you. Do you ever sort of prepare like a contract, or give them, I always tell kids to give them a speech that you should have, this is going to come, this is going to happen to you. You are going to be asked by friends, family. So I tell them that they should have like a little speech prepared, but then I also say, make a contract and then spell everything out, and then also perhaps like have a deposit. Do you ask people for deposits at all? I think that's also really a good idea.
When you're talking to actual clients who pay money?
Well, I mean, and like usually my suggestion is know what you're worth. And if it's a friend, then I usually tell and when I used to teach students, I would tell them, make sure that you say something like this. The smallest website that I work on is about $500. Is that something you're comfortable with? Because then it just sets the expectations that that's what you're worth. And then if they're interested, then you work out a contract, and then you ask for a deposit. Always get a deposit, unless it's like, your mom and dad or something. Then you can bypass the deposit. Siblings, I think you should say, hey, I need 10%, and usually for me, it's like 50% of the deposit, because then it's like because I've been robbed by people who get me to do something like a website, and then they never pay me. So from that, I learned a deposit that is non-refundable in case they just disappear, at least pays me for the minimum amount of work. I don't know if you do any of that.
Yeah. So when I was running my business, I had a whole process. Like I would, when a company asked me to do something, I'd say, I can give you a quote. Just like, you can tell me what you want and I can give you a quote, or I can come in and do a 2-hour session and map out what you actually need. And it costs, I forget, $250, I think. And then we spend those 2 hours going through the project to say, like, what is it you're actually looking for? And from that, I would then write a report for them that says, these are the things that you are looking for. These are the things that would be solutions to these problems. And then have like must have, could have, would be nice to have columns and everything. And that was what they got for $250. And then they can take that and go shop it around if they want to, or they could hire me. And then if they hired me, that would become the contract. So the contract would be like this massive 19-page monster that a lawyer wrote, plus that entire thing stapled onto it. And part of that was a payment. It would include a payment scheme that was like X percent up front, X percent at halfway point, and a bunch of like benchmarks. And then a stipulation of how many hours will this take? When will this be done on my end? What parts of this require the client to do work? And if there's a requirement for the client to do work, like produce content to go to a website or something like that, I would actually stipulate, if they go over time by this much, I start charging them for being late. So I charge my client more for just not doing their work, for me just sitting around doing nothing, because I'm waiting for them to do stuff, right? And then say, I would charge like, they would pay down to 80% at handoff. And then I give them a 2-week window that was like QA, where they can say, no, I don't like it, we need to make changes, and then stipulate how many hours within that 2-week window I can use on making changes. And if they don't say anything at the end of those 2 weeks, then they pay me the full price. Or if they have anything within those 2 weeks, I'll do it. And then any work after that comes at a specific hourly rate. Right. So I ran into enough problems that I made this. And I remember I was hired by Microsoft to do a project once. And I sent them my contract, and they're like, Jesus Christ, this contract is more intense than our contract. Because I had a very good lawyer write a very intense contract.
Well, Jim says also, don't start to work until you actually have that deposit payment in your bank.
Oh, yeah.
If they need it now, they can get you paid now. And I think it just establishes, that establishes that relationship. Like if they're serious, they're not going to have a problem paying you something up front. Yeah. And so don't be shy and know your business. Well, do you have any experience? Yeah.
If you're taking big projects, it's actually worth looking into doing things like escrow, or do what the lawyers do, which is you say like, you give us a ton of cash upfront, and then we will burn out that cash. And then if we don't spend it all, you get it back. But like, if you think the project's going to be like a 3-month project, you have to pay contractors and you do all the work. You have to act like a contractor and actually do it properly. Don't pay out of your own pocket, and have a business account to manage that money so that the IRS or whatever tax authority doesn't come and crack your head afterwards to say like, why do you have $150,000 funneling through your personal account.
Yeah.
Things I have done include that. And it
This
does
would make a
not look
good-
good on your taxes.
Yeah, you could write like a whole book on all those mistakes.
Like I
We
said,
could-
I've made a lot of mistakes.
I think this might make a good future show.
Yeah, business.
Absolutely. We should invite someone who actually knows how to do like business too.
Well, you sound pretty good, Morten. So yeah.
I know how to make mistakes. I don't know how to do it properly.
Super.
All right. Well, we are 1 minute and 8 seconds over time already. So I think we did a good job here. The NAP podcast, not NAP live stream, which is not a podcast, airs every Wednesday at this time, whatever this time is in your time zone. Of course, it's on the internet, so you can watch it anytime after it aired. If you have any subjects you want us to cover, please contact any one of us on LinkedIn to tell us what you want us to cover. Otherwise, tune in next week for more exciting and nap-worthy conversations.